Recently, I've been working on a series of papers that investigates the regulation of financial reporting that entails the disclosure of financial statements and the verification of that statements or those statements through third-party auditors. Whenever there's any scandal in the corporate world, or whenever there is some complaint that we don't have information about what the firms are doing, regulators tend to be happy and jump in and say, look, we need more disclosure. And this is something that, for example, is now in the US happening with respect to disclosure of private firms. For public firms, the SEC, the regulator in the US, is already requiring a lot of information, but for private firms, the US has always been somewhat of an outlier and not requiring a lot of information, and they're reconsidering that. Given this impulse, we're wondering, well, how much can it actually do? And so for that, we go to Europe, where nicely there's already for a long time more regulation for these private firms. And so we can somewhat observe a counterfactual how the world would look like if we had this type of regulation. And in Europe, what you see is that primarily with those disclosures, you tend to hurt the smaller private firms and help the firms that are a bit larger, that have the resources to use those financials and look at them and spot profitable markets. And so that is, in essence, at least validating in some sense the concerns that are often voiced by private firms that say, look, we don't want to have that disclosure, not because we're hiding anything bad from our suppliers, our customers. They get the information if they want to. But we don't want to make it public because then we can be exploited by larger, more resourceful companies. And we find some evidence to that effect. We're then looking at not just profitability of the firms, but really innovation, because that is something that's important to study, as innovation, especially on aggregate, is important for economic growth, and that has all the positive knock-on effects for welfare, and everyone cares about this. And so innovation is really an important measure to study. We look at it precisely because it's not clear what happens to innovation. It could be that some firms are doing less of it, but others do more, and then on aggregate, it's unclear where we're landing. We indeed find that if those firms have to disclose how profitable their market is, it seems they're getting more competitive pressures. Because of those competitive pressures, they don't have the resources anymore to spend their time innovating, because they know whenever I find anything that's useful for me, I have to disclose that it's profitable. Others can come in and take over that market. And so that stifles the innovation incentives, especially of the smaller ones. Once we look at the aggregate picture, it's actually more nuanced. There you really see the larger ones are gaining, the smaller ones are losing. But on net, it's very difficult to sign what's happening there. So primarily we can just talk about this redistribution, and that's something that regulators may want to consider. But what actually happens at the aggregate level is yet another difficult question that future research hopefully can say something to.